Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring social mobility,
Okay.
but not just the usual, climb the ladder, earn more money kind of thing.
Right.
We're going to be going a bit beyond that.
Yeah.
Our sources, research papers, some political speeches,
Mm-hmm.
even a few opinion pieces,
Mm-hmm.
they all make a pretty compelling case
Mm-hmm.
that maybe the way we think about social mobility needs an update.
Yeah, it's not just about if people are moving up or down. It's about whether
Right.
our very definition of up is even leading to a good place for individuals and for society as a whole.
Yeah, it's like, imagine working your tail off to reach the top of a ladder, only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from these sources.
It's a great analogy. For example, one of the things that jumps out at me from these sources is
Yeah.
this focus on relentless upward mobility, this idea that we always need to be striving for more. Some sources argue that this might actually be contributing to one of the biggest problems facing the UK and even the world, rising inequality.
That makes sense. And the sources don't just theorize about it. They've got the numbers to back it up.
Right.
One study showed that in the UK, the top 10% of earners are now making 12 times more
Wow.
than the bottom 10%.
That's a huge.
Back in 1985, it was 8 times greater. So that's a massive jump in just a few decades.
It is, and it really raises the question of whether everyone even has a fair shot at climbing that ladder anymore, even if we assume up is always better, which is something else we'll unpack.
Right. And that's where this Easterlin paradox thing comes in.
Yeah.
It really got me thinking. Basically, it says that once you hit a certain income level, about 22,100 pounds a year in the UK, according to one study, more money doesn't actually translate to more happiness.
Yeah, the implication being, if we're defining social mobility solely by income, we might be missing the mark on what actually leads to a fulfilling life. It's like we're chasing a bigger paycheck, potentially at the cost of things that actually matter for our well-being.
Right.
Our health, our relationships, a sense of purpose.
It's almost like society is telling us to sprint on this treadmill, but no one's checked if it's actually pointed towards a destination we want to reach.
Precisely. And this brings us to some of the key reasons why our sources suggest the current model of social mobility might be unsustainable.
Okay.
There are three main ones they highlight.
Let's dive into those. We've already touched on the first one, rising inequality.
Yeah.
What are the other two that really stood out to you?
Well, the second one focuses on education.
Okay.
We often hear it called, the great equalizer, right?
Right.
But some of these sources are pushing back on that, saying that even if everyone gets a degree, it's no guarantee of a good life or even a good job in today's world.
So are they saying education is bad?
Not at all. It's more nuanced than that. They're pointing out that the landscape is shifting.
Okay.
For one thing, we've got this global skills race happening.
Mm-hmm.
The developing world is rapidly expanding its education systems,
Right.
which means companies can move knowledge-based jobs to lower-cost countries. Having a degree from the UK might not hold the same weight it used to.
So even if you climb that education ladder, the rungs might be getting further apart, or the ladder itself might end up somewhere unexpected.
Exactly. And then there's this other concept that bring up, digital Taylorism.
Okay.
It refers to how even those supposedly high-skill, knowledge-based jobs are becoming more routine, more standardized.
Oh, okay.
Almost like the factory model being applied to white-collar work.
Hold on. So you're saying even if you win the education game, the prize itself might not be all that fulfilling?
That's one of the arguments being made, yes. And it's particularly relevant in the context of social mobility, because if we're pushing people towards these kinds of jobs as markers of success,
Yeah.
we need to be honest about what those jobs actually entail.
That's a good point. It's like we're sold this image of the fulfilling career, but maybe the reality is more like a digital assembly line for a lot of people.
That's a stark way to put it. But yes, that's the concern some of these sources are raising. It's not about saying these jobs are bad, but about recognizing that the nature of work is changing.
Right.
And our understanding of social mobility needs to keep pace.
Okay, so we've got rising inequality, the changing landscape of education and work.
Right.
What's the third reason these sources are saying the traditional view of social mobility might be unsustainable?
Well, the third one circles back to the Easterlin paradox and what it tells us about happiness and well-being.
Okay.
If endless striving for higher income doesn't actually equal a better life, then what's the point of structuring our whole society around that pursuit?
So it's like we're all on this ladder climbing frenzy, but maybe we should be asking ourselves if the ladder is even leading toward the things that actually make us happy and fulfilled.
Precisely. And some of the sources are suggesting that instead of this narrow focus on economic upward mobility,
Mhm.
we need to embrace a more holistic approach.
Holistic social mobility. What does
Yes.
that even look like? Are we talking about ditching the ladder altogether?
Not necessarily ditching it, but maybe thinking of it more like a jungle gym.
Okay.
You can move up, down, sideways, depending on what matters most to you.
I like that. It's less about one rigid path and more about having the freedom to define your own version of success.
Exactly. And this isn't a brand new idea either.
Right.
Back in the early 20th century, a sociologist named Petirim Sorokin
Okay.
talked about social mobility in a multidimensional way. He said people could move up or down on different scales: economic, political, occupational, even religious.
So it's not just about how much money you make, but about your level of influence in different areas of life.
Right. And another thing our sources highlight is the limitation of always comparing ourselves to our parents' generation.
Okay.
That's called intergenerational mobility. What about mobility within a lifetime? Intragenerational mobility. Maybe you start in a low-skill job that through learning or taking initiative, you gain more autonomy, more responsibility, maybe even become a leader in your field. That's mobility too, but it doesn't always show up in the traditional metrics.
It's like we're so obsessed with measuring the distance between rungs on this one ladder that we're missing all these other ways people are moving, growing, achieving things.
That's a great way to put it. And this is especially relevant now with the changes happening in the job market. We're seeing this trend called the hourglass economy,
Uh-huh.
where there's growth in both high-skill and low-skill jobs, but the middle is shrinking.
So is it like a giant game of musical chairs, but with fewer and fewer chairs in the middle?
It's a helpful visual, but it's more complex than that. It's not just one giant hourglass,
Right.
but thousands of smaller ones, with variations across regions and occupations. And this raises a key question. Can we find ways to measure progress within jobs beyond just income?
Right. Like, what if you love your job even if it's not traditionally seen as prestigious or high-paying?
Hmm.
Or what if you gain new skills, take on more responsibility, or find ways to have a bigger impact on your community through your work?
Exactly. Those are all forms of mobility that often get overlooked in the traditional model.
It's almost like we need to broaden our definition of what upward even means.
Mhm.
Instead of just focusing on climbing a predetermined ladder, maybe it's about creating more paths, more jungle gyms, more opportunities for people to find their own version of success.
I think that's a great way to frame it. It's about expanding our vision of what's possible and recognizing that true social mobility should be about empowering individuals to thrive, not just forcing them into a narrow definition of what success looks like.
This has really got me thinking about the role of education in all of this. If we're moving towards a more holistic view of social mobility, what does that mean for how we educate people?
That's a key question and one that our sources explore in depth. They definitely don't dismiss the importance of education,
Okay.
but they do ask, can it support a broader vision of social mobility, one that goes beyond just getting a good paying job?
Yeah, it's like, what are we actually trying to achieve through education? Are we trying to create well-rounded individuals, critical thinkers, engaged citizens,
Right.
or are we just churning out workers for the global economy?
Those are fundamental questions, and the answers might lead us to rethink some core assumptions about how we educate. But before we go there,
Yeah.
there's one really crucial aspect of education these sources highlight, and it might surprise you: early childhood and the role of parenting.
Oh, interesting. I'm ready to unpack that.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll pick up right there when we get back. So we were about to delve into early childhood and parenting. It's
Yeah.
not always the first thing that springs to mind when we talk about social mobility,
Right.
but our sources suggest it's incredibly important.
Yeah, it's interesting because we often think about education starting when a child enters school,
Yeah,
but these sources are saying it actually begins much earlier within the family setting.
exactly. The work of economist James Heckman has been really influential in this area. He argues that early childhood interventions,
Mhm.
especially those focused on supporting parents, can have a huge impact on a child's future success,
Okay.
even more so than just cognitive skills or academic achievement.
So it's not just about sending kids to preschool.
Right.
It's about giving parents the tools to nurture those essential skills that aren't always taught in a classroom.
Yes.
Things like persistence, self-control, and motivation.
Precisely. Those non-cognitive skills, as they're often called,
Yeah.
can be even more crucial than straight academic ability when it comes to navigating the challenges of life, building relationships, and achieving long-term goals.
That makes a lot of sense. But it also brings up a question for me.
Yeah.
How can we support parents in developing these skills in their children without adding even more pressure to an already stressful situation?
Right.
Raising kids is hard enough as it is.
You're absolutely right. It's a delicate balance. And it's where things can get a bit tricky. Some of the sources highlight this debate around cultural capital,
Okay.
which basically means that different social classes tend to have different parenting practices, and those practices can give children advantages or disadvantages in the education system.
Okay, so it's like if your parents are highly educated,
Mm.
they might be more likely to take you to museums, read to you every night,
Yeah.
expose you to a wider range of experiences.
Exactly.
Those experiences can then translate into greater academic success,
Yes.
even if it's not a conscious thing.
Exactly. And it raises all sorts of questions about fairness
Yeah.
and equal opportunity.
Right.
How do we level the playing field without overstepping boundaries and telling parents how to raise their children?
Yeah.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really makes you think about the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah.
Social mobility isn't just about individual effort. It's also about the environment you're raised in,
Mm-hmm.
the resources you have access to, the cultural values you're exposed to from a young age.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another key area explored in our sources, the school curriculum itself.
Okay.
There's a fascinating debate going on right now in England about the shift towards a more classical curriculum,
Yeah.
with a strong emphasis on traditional subjects and rigorous testing.
Yes. I've heard about this. It seems like a bit of a throwback to the old days focusing on rote learning and memorization.
It does have that feel to it, and some of our sources express concerns about this narrow focus.
Yeah.
Does it really equip students for the complexities of the 21st century? Does it leave enough room for creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration? Those 21st century skills we talked about earlier.
Those are the skills that are constantly being highlighted as essential for navigating a rapidly changing world,
Yeah.
for adapting to new technologies, for solving complex problems.
Exactly. And there's another layer to this debate that I find particularly interesting.
Okay.
Some sources challenge the very premise that these 21st century skills are primarily about meeting employers' needs.
So it's not just about preparing kids for the workforce.
Yeah.
It's about equipping them to be engaged citizens,
Right.
critical thinkers,
Right.
well-rounded individuals who can contribute to society in meaningful ways,
Yes.
regardless of their job title.
That's the argument, and it really resonated with me. It's about shifting our perspective from seeing education solely as a means to an economic end,
Okay.
to seeing it as a process of personal and societal growth.
That's a powerful reframing.
Oh.
But even if we completely overhaul the school curriculum, wouldn't those deep-seated cultural values around success and status still persist?
Right.
How do we address that?
That's the million-dollar question. And our sources acknowledge that cultural change is a long-term project, one that requires a multi-pronged approach. It's
Yes.
not going to happen overnight.
Of course, it's a process.
Mhm.
But where do we even begin?
Well, the sources offer a few starting points. They talk about the importance of changing institutional behavior.
Okay. What does that look like in practice?
It means that schools, universities, businesses, governments, all these institutions need to start modeling the values we want to see in society. A focus on well-being, a commitment to social justice, a prioritization of ethical behavior.
So it's not enough to just talk about these values. We need to see them reflected in the way our institutions operate, the way they treat their employees, the way they interact with the community.
Exactly. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And these sources suggest that this kind of shift in institutional behavior can have a ripple effect,
Okay.
influencing individual attitudes and behaviors over time.
It makes me think of the saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
If our institutions embody these values, it can inspire individuals to do the same.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of individuals, there's also a role for each of us to play in shifting the narrative around social mobility.
Okay, so what can we do as individuals beyond just hoping that institutions will change?
Our sources highlight the importance of public discourse and civic engagement.
Right.
They encourage us to have those difficult conversations about what truly matters,
Yeah.
not just in our personal lives, but also in our communities and in the wider society.
So it's about engaging in those debates, challenging those ingrained assumptions about success and status,
Yes.
speaking up for a more holistic and sustainable vision of social mobility.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to question our own deeply held beliefs and values, to open ourselves up to new perspectives and possibilities.
You know, one of the things that struck me in these sources was how they challenged this dominant narrative of a broken Britain.
Ah, yes, that's a powerful one.
Yeah.
It's the idea that the UK is in decline with rising inequality, declining social mobility, and a
Mhm.
loss of trust in institutions. It's a pretty bleak picture.
It is, and while those concerns are certainly valid,
Right.
these sources seem to be cautioning against embracing that narrative too readily.
They argue that it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
If we constantly tell ourselves that things are broken beyond repair,
Mm.
we might be less likely to work towards positive change.
So instead of dwelling on what's wrong, we need to focus on what's right and what
Yes.
we can do to make things better.
Precisely. And our sources suggest there are actually reasons for optimism,
Okay.
even amidst the challenges.
Right.
They point to a growing awareness of the need for a more holistic approach to social mobility, the emergence of new models of education and work,
Right.
and a shift in values among younger generations.
So maybe it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. It's a complex situation for sure,
Right.
but there's a lot of potential for positive change if we're willing to challenge the status quo
Yeah.
and work together to create a more just and fulfilling society.
This has been a really insightful conversation. I feel like we've uncovered a lot of important ideas and nuances about social mobility.
Me too.
What stands out to you as one of the most important takeaways so far?
For me, it's the realization that social mobility isn't a monolithic concept.
Right.
It's not just about climbing one ladder to reach a predetermined destination. It's about creating a society that offers multiple paths, multiple opportunities for individuals to thrive based on their own unique values and aspirations.
I completely agree. And it's about recognizing that true social mobility requires a shift in both individual and societal values. It's about moving beyond the how much of social mobility and starting to focus on the why.
That's brilliantly put. Now, before we wrap up, there's one more key area we need to explore. Higher education. Its role in social mobility is being questioned more than ever.
Right. With rising tuition costs and the increasing number of graduates ending up in jobs that don't even require a degree,
Right.
it's a valid question.
Absolutely. So let's delve into that when we come back after a short break.
Higher education, right. It's a topic that always seems to spark debate,
Yeah,
but it feels especially relevant to our deep dive into social mobility.
you're right. Higher education has traditionally been seen as a key driver of social mobility.
Right.
That golden ticket to better jobs, higher salaries, and a more secure future.
Yeah.
But our sources suggest that this narrative is becoming increasingly complicated.
You can't ignore those headlines about rising tuition costs, graduates struggling to find jobs, and people questioning the value of a degree in today's economy. It makes you wonder if that golden ticket has lost some of its shine.
It's a valid question, and one that our sources explore from different angles.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have those concerns about the economic return on investment.
Yeah.
Is a degree still worth the cost when you factor in those student loan repayments
Right.
and the possibility of ending up in a job that doesn't even require a degree?
It's a real dilemma for a lot of people, especially when you consider those alternative paths we discussed earlier, like vocational training or entrepreneurship.
Exactly. But on the other hand, our sources also highlight the non-economic benefits of higher education,
Okay.
those aspects that go beyond just earning potential.
Tell me more about those.
Yeah.
What are some of the benefits they point to?
Well, they talk about things like improved social and civic engagement, better health outcomes, increased interpersonal trust.
Okay.
Those qualities that contribute to a well-rounded and fulfilling life, both individually and for society as a whole.
So it's not just about getting a job. It's about becoming a more engaged citizen, a more informed and critical thinker,
Yeah.
someone who can contribute to their community in meaningful ways.
Exactly. And some of the research even suggests that higher education can lead to greater tolerance and understanding of different cultures and perspectives, which is incredibly valuable in today's increasingly interconnected world.
It makes sense. Higher education ideally exposes you to new ideas, challenges your assumptions,
Right.
helps you develop critical thinking skills, all of which can make you a more informed and engaged member of society.
That's the ideal, yes.
Ah.
But of course, the reality is more complex. Not all higher education experiences are created equal.
Right.
And the sources acknowledge that there are issues with access, affordability,
Right.
and the relevance of certain curriculums to the demands of the modern workplace.
That brings us to those alternative models of higher education that some of our sources are really excited about.
Yes.
We touched on them briefly earlier,
Yeah.
but I'd love to hear more about them.
Absolutely. One that's gained a lot of traction is MOOCs,
Right.
massive open online courses. They have the potential to democratize access to knowledge, offering high-quality courses from top universities to anyone with an internet connection, regardless of their location or financial
It's
resources.
like opening up the ivory tower and letting everyone in,
Right.
which is a pretty radical idea.
It is, and it has its challenges, of course,
Sure.
but it represents a potential shift in how we think about delivering and accessing higher education.
Right.
Then there's the idea of unbundling higher education.
Unbundling, what does that entail?
It's about breaking down the traditional degree structure into smaller, more flexible components that cater to individual needs and goals.
So instead of committing to a 4-year degree program,
Right.
you could pick and choose courses that are relevant to your specific interests or career aspirations.
Exactly. It's about moving away from a one-size-fits-all model towards a more personalized and adaptable approach. And finally, there's this concept of the ecological university.
Ecological university. Now that's a new one for me.
It's a vision of a more diverse higher education ecosystem,
Okay.
one that includes shorter courses, part-time options, vocational pathways alongside traditional degrees, apprenticeships, online learning,
Right.
all coexisting and interacting to meet the needs of a wider range of learners.
So it's like a buffet of educational options rather than a set menu.
That's a great analogy, and it reflects a growing recognition that the traditional model of higher education doesn't work for everyone. It's about creating more pathways, more flexibility, more opportunities for people to pursue their own version of success.
This all ties back beautifully to our earlier conversations about a more holistic approach to social mobility.
Yes.
It's not just about pushing everyone towards a university degree.
Right.
It's about creating a diverse range of options that allow individuals to thrive based on their own talents, interests, and goals.
I couldn't agree more. And it's exciting to see these new models emerging, pushing the boundaries of what higher education can be. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to come back to something we touched on earlier, this idea of reframing the narrative around success.
Yes, it feels like a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
If we're truly going to rethink social mobility, we need to rethink what it means to succeed in the first place.
Absolutely. Our sources suggest that we need to move beyond that narrow definition of success based solely on income, job title,
Right.
and material possessions.
It's about valuing those non-material aspects of life.
Yes.
Those things that contribute to genuine well-being,
Mhm.
strong relationships, a sense of purpose,
Yeah.
a connection to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that success can look different for different people. There's no one-size-fits-all definition.
It's about creating a society that values diversity in all its forms.
Yeah.
Diversity of backgrounds, experiences, perspectives,
Right.
and even definitions of success.
Beautifully said. And as we've seen throughout our deep dive, this shift in perspective has implications for everything from education and the workplace to government policy and cultural values.
It's a big project for sure,
Yeah.
but it feels like a necessary one if we want to create a more just, equitable, and ultimately a more fulfilling society for everyone.
I wholeheartedly agree. And while we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
I hope this conversation has sparked some new ideas for our listeners, encouraging them to think critically about social mobility and to challenge those deeply ingrained assumptions about what it means to succeed.
Me too. And who knows, maybe some of those listeners will be the ones leading the charge towards a more holistic and sustainable vision of social mobility in the future.
That would be wonderful.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close. A huge thank you to you for sharing your insights and expertise with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey of exploration. We hope you found it thought-provoking and inspiring. Until next time, keep diving deep.